We are just starting the broadcast. 1 second. I'll wait till everyone starts flooding in. How are you? How's you're in San Francisco right now?
Redwood City, so not far away.
Okay. How's it over there?
Oh, it's just never ending lockdown. We've been here lockdown and there's no end in sight. So it's just the new normal, I think, for us for a while.
Yeah. Have you still got family in Melbourne?
Yeah, and my brother and sister-in-law are there, and my uncle. And then I've got some family in Eastern Victoria and in Bendigo.
Okay. So you know exactly what's been going on there.
In reflection, I think it's easier just to stay in lockdown. I think it was really hard for them to go out and then to go back.
It's so hard.
It really was. So
yeah. It's pretty mean. Yeah. Amazing. Well, we've got 110 people on, all flooding in. I'll give everyone a second, but on the chat, I'd love to hear where everyone is tuning in from. So just say hi and shout out where you're from. So Stephanie from Canberra, hello. All panelists and attendees. Sydney, Melbourne, Sydney, Brizzy. Oh, Byron, amazing. London. Oh, hey, Kim. Tokyo. So good. Yeah, I love doing this. Hi from Japan. See, it's great.
Hey, everyone.
Amazing. Well, super conscious of time and so keen to get onto your slides and hear from you. So I'll just do a quick intro and then I'll hand over to you, Laura. So everyone, welcome to the second day of Liminal. I'm Sophia and I head up the fellowship at StartMate. So together with Blackbird, we have produced Liminal to give you a snapshot into careers in a startup, but also give you a pathway to get in there. So for many, there seems like there isn't a clear path, but we want to show you that there is. And as you'll see from Laura today, the path to a successful career is certainly not straightforward. So if you are thinking about a career change, whether out of corporate and into startup, or even from just one function to another, we really hope to inspire you to make the leap. And so Liminal is a taste of the fellowship action. So applications are open. They opened yesterday. You have until the 9th of August, and the first stage literally takes 10 minutes. So I really do encourage you, if you are thinking about really making that leap into startups, definitely apply. Also on Friday, we're going to be hosting an AMA, so you can hear more and ask us any questions about the program. And that starts the program starts in late September, and it's really around building your knowledge and network in the startup space. A couple of quick housekeeping things, and then Laura, I'm going to hand over to you. So this session will be recorded and available for replay afterwards, and for you to share with anyone that you know would have missed it and enjoyed this. Please do put all your questions into Slido. So I'm just going to pop that link now into the chat. Here you can upvote questions and write in your own questions, and we're going to take them from there. As always, feel free to tweet and post on LinkedIn about this. It's great to hear your feedback and for you to help us spread the word. And then after this session, there is going to be a 30-minute breakout session where we can actually see more than just our faces on the screen, and you can come and meet other people that are thinking about making this leap too. So Laura, now CEO of Willow Pump, I hope I get this right. So it's the world's first quiet all-in-one in-bra wearable breast pump.
That's
and
right.
And you joined from Airbnb, and you've had just this amazing career across great tech companies, eBay, PayPal, Skype. You're originally from Australia, you did your MBA at Stanford, and you're now living in San Francisco with your husband and 3 children. So yeah, we'd love to hand over to you now to hear about your career and the real story behind all of those moves that you have made.
Great, thank you. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So you guys should be able to see this pretty well. All right, you should see that now. And let me just put this on presentation mode. There we go. All right, does that look good?
Yeah, perfect.
Let me just turn subtitles off. Excellent. So I'm going to try and go through this reasonably quickly because I would really love to engage in the dialogue with all of you. But what I wanted to do was just to talk a little bit about the perspective of careers and how to think about managing them very holistically. I think sometimes we see amazing careers and this amazing speed and it all seems very unattainable, but I wanted to talk about, at least through the lens of my own experience, what can be challenging along the way and how to really navigate through those challenges and find your way into startups and great types of opportunities. So this is a quick view of my career. And you might look at my job right now, like I'm the CEO of Willow, which is an incredibly successful company. And you might look at my LinkedIn and you might think that this has been a super crazy career ladder, right? Like University of Melbourne, McKinsey, Stanford, eBay, Skype, PayPal, Airbnb, it all looks great. But I feel like sometimes LinkedIn is like the Instagram of the job world. You really only see the highlight reel, and the reality is often much tougher and much messier. And so that's really what I want to share with you today, is some of the messiness that I've experienced and how I've worked through that. And one of the big themes of my career, particularly early on, is that half steps in your career can unlock tremendous learning and growth. And I really encourage people, one of the most important things that I coach people on is if they're trying to make a change, like how could you make a half step into that change? How can you do a little bit of your current job and a little bit of the new job and find your way more smoothly into some of those opportunities? So what I thought I'd do is just step you through my career and tell you a little bit of the half steps and the changes that I've made and use that as a bit of a lens to talk about some of the things that I've learned and some things that might be helpful for you. So what you see here is going to be a map of my career that we'll build. Each line represents a year from graduating the University of Melbourne with my Bachelor of Arts in Commerce in 2000 right up to today. So early in my career, the first 5 years or so were pretty straightforward. I spent about 3 years at McKinsey out of undergraduate, and then I did my MBA at Stanford. And in these two, I very deliberately picked quite broad sets of opportunities. I grew up in a small country town in Ballarat, wave if you're from Ballarat or thereby. And so I didn't have a lot of exposure to industries and companies and all that type of opportunity. And so I really wanted to go into management consulting to see a bunch of industries. And then I really wanted to do an MBA to get a broad set of business understanding. And so I very deliberately started my career quite broad so that I could learn a lot and experience a lot. From there, I joined eBay. And what you'll see is the next 5 years were a ton of little half steps. I started in eBay corporate strategy because I had more of a strategy background and that was a good place to go. And I very deliberately picked eBay because they actually had a very good track record of starting people in strategy, but moving them into operating roles. These first 4 moves were pretty quick. We acquired Skype and I moved to London and I ran Skype strategy and I ran consumer products there as well. And then pretty quickly I came back to the US to go to PayPal strategy. And then I took an operational role in PayPal running a group called Funding Mix there. So this was a whole bunch of pretty quick moves. And what was happening under the hood here was I had a really amazing mentor who was the CFO of eBay when it started, then went to be the CEO of Skype and went to be the CEO of PayPal. And I basically followed him. He dragged me with him to those different opportunities. And really, I was able to sit under his wing and get a whole bunch of amazing experiences working with that. I was only in Funding Mix for about a few months and eBay had a new a new CEO. So Meg Whitman left, John Donahoe became the CEO and he asked me to be his chief of staff. So I did that for a little while. And then I started to move into some more operating roles. So I went over to be the GM of mobile at PayPal and I spent some time in PayPal marketing. And then I went right to the other side of the spectrum here and worked for a couple of years running university recruiting, which is an HR recruiting function. And then I went to Global Trust of eBay, where I sort of worked across customer support and trust and risk in a very kind of operational policy type of role there. And then I kind of started to get a little more focused on this general management track. To do VP of Consumer Selling and Shipping and then the GM of Core Host at Airbnb. And for perspective, at eBay, consumer selling and shipping is about 1/3 of the business for all of eBay, and core hosted Airbnb is about 3/4 of the business. So some pretty big meaty roles. My goal was always to be CEO. I always set that as my goal, even if I wasn't entirely sure at all moments of my career that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be very clear that that was my goal, because that helped me really think about broadening my experience. And it helped me get really good feedback from folks as well, because I sort of set that as my expectation to all my coaches, and they coached me with that in mind. And so eventually I got there 2 months ago. I just started as the CEO of Willow, which is a really amazing company. They brought out all-in-one wearable breast pump 2 years ago. For those of you who have pumped, as I did, I've got 3 little kids. The old experience of pumping was terrible. These loud, noisy things. You had to take your shirt off and sit in a back room and be tethered to a wall. This is a pump that you can literally just put under your shirt and go about your day. You can run a marathon in it. You can sleep in it. You can do yoga and downward dog with it without it spilling. It's a really amazing innovation and a team that I'm incredibly proud of. So that was a little bit of my journey, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how that felt and how it played out. But you'll see a lot of different moves with different amounts of time, and quite a variety of different functions as well. And it would be remiss of me to not mention that while all of this was going on, so was life. So I started in Australia. I moved to the US in 2003 to do my MBA. I moved to London briefly for Skype, moved back to the US pretty quickly after that. I got engaged and married, and then I had 3 kids. So there's been a lot going on beyond just the career over that time. One of the things that is very notable is this is the path. Now we'll start to unpack what's been difficult along the way. One of the things that has been really tricky is I've had some moments of some pretty tough feedback at different stages. So let me walk you through part of the narrative of what I was being told by folks during this period. So at the start, as you can see, a lot of my early roles were quite sort of strategic, right? Not as much in the operational side. And I was getting a bit of a pounding for this within eBay Inc. You're too much oriented on strategy. You need to get some operating experience. Stop doing the strategy stuff, like go get a real job. And so I did. I went to PayPal funding mix. But as I mentioned, I was only there for about 6 months before I got plucked out to be the chief of staff for our new CEO, John Donahoe. And then I got a ton of flack for that decision, right? Like, oh, that's not going to give you operating experience. Here you go again. You're just kind of going for the helper or the strategic role. That's not going to get you where you need to go. So then I went over, I'm like, all right, I can do this. So I took a much more operating role, really in the area of product development, to be the GM of PayPal Mobile. And at this point, I was sort of like, I'm like, okay, I want to get to VP. And I was like, how am I going to get there really, really well? And first of all, one option for me would have been to keep going up the strategy, because there were some great examples of people who went really deep on strategy to VP level and then into operating. But I was like, no, I actually think I need to pick a different function and get a more breadth of experience so that I'll be a better VP when I get there. And so I'm like, all right, product development it is. I've had a little bit of experience at Skype and PayPal. Now I'm going to go for it with mobile. But then my feedback was, nah, you know what, Laura, this isn't going to work for you. There are 2 types of CEO in the world. There's like product visionary, and then there is, let's call it strategic operator at scale. You're never going to be a product visionary. That's not in your DNA. We're Silicon Valley. We need people that are just like massive Steve Jobs types. That's not you. Give up on that. Go become a strategic operator at scale. I was like, okay, so I was going to go up on product, but now I need to go out. And so I started going out, and then I got all sorts of weird feedback as well. When I came back to university recruiting after my first baby, and a number of people looked at me like I was crazy to take this role. They're like, you're going to HR, right? You've been running mobile and doing all these big things. Are you on the mum track? Many people. I actually had one person reach out and ask if I would be their EA, because clearly I had sort of given up on a career now that I had gone into HR. Like all these really wild assumptions. This ended up being one of the best jobs I've ever had. I learned so much and I grew so much in that role, but I got a ton of flack for it. And so I'm like, all right, so I need to get into more operations. I took an operations role, and everyone's like, it's going to be tough to get into general management for here. So I had some really difficult moments of some pretty confronting feedback along the way. And one of the things I learned through that was it's really important to hear feedback, particularly when you're struggling, because there's always some truth to it. But you need to take it under advisement, right? Like listen to the bits that make sense, challenge it, understand it, weave it in with your own goals and experience, and come to a really good place. So that was some of the tough feedback that I had. The other thing that isn't always obvious, and certainly not obvious from a LinkedIn highlight reel, is that a lot of my moves were not upwards. I had quite a lot of moves that at the time felt very downwards or very sideways. And these again are sort of little half steps, but let me give you some examples. When I moved back to PayPal strategy, that felt like a sideways, maybe down step, because I'd been running a product team and then I stopped. When I went to PayPal funding mix, I actually went from hanging out with all the senior executives and the exec teams to being really, really deep in the organization. That felt like a downward step. When I went from running PayPal Mobile, which was a $3 billion business unit and amazing, to PayPal marketing, that felt like a very big down step and was very, very difficult. And similarly, when I went to university recruiting, I told you how that landed. It didn't feel like a great role, even though in all of these roles, I learned so much. And that's one of the key things I learned is if you can't always go directly up, like it just doesn't work out that way. But what I was very clear on was when I was sort of hitting a bit of a ceiling, which we'll talk about in a moment, and needing to go sideways, those are moments that I really optimized for learning, right? Okay, so if I can't go up now, can I go sideways and like round out my experience? That's why I picked the job at PayPal Mobile. I had to step out of the GM of mobile role right when I was 6 months pregnant. And so I had about 3 months to do something. And I was like, gosh, let me just go do marketing for a little while and get that experience. And the other thing to note is like life does impact this, right? Like I had 2 kids around about one before university recruiting and one after, and it does, like it gets you a little off your trajectory, and it can be quite difficult to ramp up on a role, execute, have a baby, ramp back up again. I've certainly felt a lot of periods of time where I just felt like I was stagnating a little bit along the way. And that's really connected to this next point, which was have been lots of moments in my career where I've really felt like I'm just banging up against a ceiling. The first was around this period, and you'll see they're very correlated with those moments of sideways and downwards. I got to director pretty quickly at eBay, but then trying to get to senior director was a really difficult barrier for me to cut through. And I had to bounce around a few roles to find the right one where I could kind of have the scope and the experience to be really successful. And that ultimately was the chief of staff role. Similarly, I spent a very long time being very, very close to vice president, but not actually breaking through. That started at the GM of mobile role. The person before and after me were both VPs, so I knew I was really close. And then university recruiting, I was sort of promised the VP role as part of that, but it didn't quite happen. And it wasn't until I got to the global trust role that everything aligned around scope and so forth. And again, I had 2 kids during this particular time, right? So it was a very difficult time to try and get momentum and to kind of get where I really wanted to go. And then, starting from a few years ago, I started to hit another ceiling, right? Which was, how do you get to senior vice president and CEO? Obviously, the organization narrows incredibly quickly. And you have to get a little creative, right? Like I didn't quite feel like it was going to happen for me at eBay. And then I went to Airbnb and I didn't quite feel like it was going to happen there. And that was a big reason why I came over to Willow, right? Like I wanted to get creative in the path I could get to that next level. But, when you look at this is the reality of how my world has felt. I felt like I've spent at least my half of my life since about 2007, not quite getting where I want to get and feeling like I'm pushing up against ceilings. And so I really wanted to summarize just a few of the lessons that I've learned along the way, and then we'll open it up to questions. But here's a little bit of what I have kind of accumulated in my knowledge base about this journey. So the first one, and this is one that I have to repeat so often to people, particularly at this point when you're about 5 or 6 years into your career, because what happens typically is for the first few years of your career, you're fairly nurtured, right? Like there's someone kind of looking after you and you're a fairly junior employee and there's usually good pathing and people are sort of looking after you. And then you hit this point where that doesn't happen anymore. And you realize that you have to take ownership of your own career. And so the first thing that I tell everyone is no one cares more about your career than you, apart from maybe your mum. Like your mum might care as much, but apart from that, no one does. And so what you need to do is be very strategic and thoughtful. Where are you today? Where do you want to go? What is the best path to get there? Not necessarily the fastest, but the best. As I mentioned quite a few times, I had sort of, you know, in the world of snakes and ladders, I had a few ladders that I could have taken that would have got me up somewhere faster, but I really didn't think that I would get the breadth of learning to do that job well when I got there. So I've quite deliberately sort of slowed down my path a few times to make sure that I can kind of get that breadth of learning, so that ultimately as CEO, you know, I come with all this experience under my belt. Lesson number 2, we talked about this, but sometimes, guess what? You have to go across or down to go up. This is why I call it a career jungle gym, not a career ladder, right? Like, it's not this perfect up thing, right? Sometimes you need to go across and sometimes you will go down. And so in those moments, as difficult as they are in the time, and as kind of, they sort of feel like it's going to be forever, right? When you're in these zones, really optimize for learning, right? It might not be the one that's going to get you the promotion, but what experience will you gain? Can you create a half step that will actually get you closer to your ultimate goal, right? When you're finding those little rubs, be very strategic about making the most out of that moment in terms of your learning and your ultimate progression. The other thing that I've learned along the way, this has been so helpful for me, is to clearly state your career goal, even if you're not sure. Whenever I have career coaching conversations with people, I often ask, well, what's your goal? And 8 times out of 10, people just say, I don't know. Because in reality, we often don't know, right? What I encourage people to do is to set a really big goal for yourself. And that has a couple of really good implications. The first is, people will take you more seriously. For the last 15 years, whenever anyone's asked me what my goal is, I've said, I want to be a CEO. Now, there's been many times that I haven't actually been sure if I wanted to be a CEO, because I know the job quite well and I know that it's very difficult, but I've always said it. And that's helped me for 2 ways. One, people take me more seriously, right? When they're looking for people to take on bigger tasks, or when they're looking for advancement opportunities, or when they're giving you feedback, they take you more seriously because they know that you have this ambitious goal. And then from a personal perspective, telling myself that has actually encouraged me to take more risks than I might have otherwise, right? Like, gosh, if I really want to be a CEO, I should probably lean into this thing that's a little hard and a little scary, because it's going to get me closer to that goal. And what I've always said to myself is, I always want to ensure I have the opportunity to be a CEO. I might not choose to do that, but I want to make sure I've given myself every chance in the world. And so that's been the way that I've sort of oriented my path. Lesson number 4, actively cultivate feedback along the way. You might find, if you're a high performer, that you don't get very much feedback. People will be like, oh, yep, good job. You're doing great. Awesome. But yet still you hit these barriers and these ceilings and you're kind of getting a little bit stuck. So what you need to do in those instances is always kind of ask people to assess you against the next job. Say, look, I want to get here. You might not start with CEO, but you might say, look, I really want to get to VP. Tell me why I'm not there. Tell me what it would take for you to see me in that role. And then you ask, and then you ask again. I remember one time when I was in that HR role, I got some feedback from my boss, and it was okay. And I shared it with one of my mentors, and they were like, do you know what? Your boss is actually very good at feedback. That was not her best work. Go back and ask her again. And so I went back to her and I said, look, that was helpful, but I would like some more sort of constructive and critical feedback. So I really, really want to get better. And she's like, okay, give me a week. And she came back a week later and she wrote out this feedback that was extraordinary. This was the sort of, you'll never be a product visionary feedback. And it was quite amazing to hear it from her, but I asked her to put a little bit more work in. She did. And I remember, like, for 3 years, I would just read that feedback over and over and over again because it was so insightful and so helpful. So ask and then ask again. As I mentioned before, you know, as you go through your career, you'll get lots of advice from a lot of different folks, and you should, right? It's really great to hear different sets of perspectives. And honestly, whenever you're making a career change, it's a good excuse to kind of tap out into your network and reconnect with people, but always trust yourself. You need to listen to your own instincts. And sometimes you kind of need to get all that information, all the advice, and then sit down and think about, okay, I hear that. Now, I know myself and I know my goals really well. What do I think is the right thing to do? So a great example, when I was pulled over to be the chief of staff, every single one of my mentors, actually I'd say like 9 out of 10 told me it was a terrible, terrible career move. Because remember, the narrative at the time was you had too much in strategy, you need operations. I'd finally got an operations role. They're like, don't do it, you're crazy. And that was pretty tough because 9 out of 10 people who I really respect told me that I should not do it. But I thought about it and I realized my ultimate goal was to be a CEO. And I'm like, gosh, what better experience than to spend a couple of years learning what it's like to be a CEO, to sit right there with a brand new CEO who's a first-time public company CEO on that journey with them. And I was like, look, I know it's not going to be accelerating my career. This is sort of almost like doing another MBA. I'm investing in a learning experience, but I feel like this will pay off in dividends. And it absolutely is, right? Like I have such a different appreciation for the role than I would have before. And then lesson number 6, take some risks and follow some great leaders, particularly early in your career. Like follow a great mentor, like I did for my first sort of few years. I just followed this guy called Rajiv from job to job and company to company, and I got like amazing experience. Try some odd jobs, try some things that seem a little odd or are a little wacky just to get different experience, move around, right? Like it's really great to take those risks. So that is my presentation. This is a quick summary of the recap, but I would really love to chat with you guys and hear any thoughts or questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Laura. This will be available afterwards, and yeah, I just wish we had way more time for questions. So I'm gonna shoot with one quickly, and if I can share these with you afterwards, that would be awesome. So just taking from the top. So why might this journey what might this journey look like for someone who doesn't have a mentor opening doors for them? So obviously right now with COVID, there's a lot of people with, this person's saying 60+ job applications. Yeah, what would be your advice to them?
Create networks. And this is uncomfortable because I'm not a network person, but I've needed to. One of the reasons I picked doing an MBA was because I knew that it would create networks, and it has. One of the reasons I picked McKinsey was because I knew it would create networks, and it has. And so I'd say, look for job opportunities or learning opportunities, as well as just general opportunities of places that are good at networking, right? Those two, honestly, McKinsey got me my first job at eBay, and Stanford has been tremendously helpful in kind of getting me a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunities and finding other talent. So, there's mentorship is not this sort of magical gift bestowed on a few people. It happens because you actively cultivate networks, even if it's not your style, and it's certainly not my style, but I force myself to do it all the time because it's important. And it comes through hard work. There's early on in my career, like that guy that I followed for a few years, guess what? He left. And then I got another mentor, John, and then guess what? He left. And so I've had to recreate a mentorship network many, many times. And each time it feels devastating because you've built these relationships and you've got this great ride and someone's got your back, and then they leave because people leave and you have to start from scratch. And so it is hard work to create networks, and it is hard work to create and keep mentors and to keep finding them, but make that part of your job, right? Like when all of my mentors left, I sat down and said, I need to find some more mentors. And I just went around and had coffee with like 5 people that were senior to figure out who I connected with. And I started again, right? It's hard work, but it's important to focus on it.
That's pretty much what the fellowship is all about, coming in and building your network. Laura, thank you so much. Absolutely love that, and the presentation and all the little steps and bringing also life into it as well. Like it's very real and super relatable. So thank you for that. As a recap, fellowship applications are now open. I'll send the link around afterwards. We're all going to jump into a networking session now. I've just posted the link on the chat. If you want to come join there, I'll split you off into groups of 4 or 5. Love to see you there. Liminal is on every day this week, 8 till 9. Hope to see you tomorrow morning. And Laura, thank you so much. That was awesome. Yeah, have a great rest of the day, and thanks everyone.
Thanks.
See you. Bye.